I started something 6 weeks ago. I didn't realize it would take me this long to get back to part two, but we started looking at the United States and Britain in Bible prophecy. And yet we were blessed to have a lot of guest speakers, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure you did as well. But I wanted to get back to that topic here today and take it a bit further. And I would like to also continue next week looking at another aspect of it. But please realize, those of you who go back in the church a long time, there are so many other aspects that I'm not going to take the time to go into. There is the part about Jeremiah's mission and taking daughters of Zedekiah's daughters to the British Isles, and then the overturnings. There is a lot of material that can be gone to as far as following some of the tracks of where the tribes went. Because northern Israel, or rather the northern house of Israel, was moved to the area of Assyria, that upper Mesopotamia, and then above it, that area between the Black and Caspian Seas, and then they began migrating, and there are tracks that can be followed. And they ended up in the British Isles for a good part of it, but good part of them, and also other parts of northwestern Europe. But some of those things, I think, depends on a person's interest. Some are not history buffs and just aren't that interested. But I do want to continue today with the topic as we had begun looking at it back in the book of Genesis. I feel that I should give a little recap. 6 weeks ago, that's a long time. But we began by looking at two nations that have changed history, modern history, and that is the British Commonwealth, and it is the United States of America. We looked at all of the wealth and all of the raw materials that have been gathered in the hands of the English-speaking peoples. And so we followed a few places in the book of Genesis where at least our booklet on the United States and Britain and prophecy, it mentions that between Genesis 12 and 22, that's Abraham's story. There are 7 different places where God appears to Abram, later as Abraham, and gave certain promises, and they were expanded. And then sometimes little change in the wording. Then it was reiterated to Isaac, and then after Isaac to Jacob. And so we followed Genesis 12 and Genesis 13 and 17 and just 22, a number of places where these promises to Abraham and his seed are mentioned. Now, let me again reiterate that there is what has been called the movement of British Israelism. It's been around a long time, and there are aspects of that movement that go way off to an extreme that becomes racist. We are not in that camp. And again, as I mentioned 6 weeks ago, the promises to Abraham, as far as our focus and our purpose, primarily are the spiritual promises. That if we are Abraham's seed, we're heirs to the promise, and that is regardless of gender or race or socioeconomic status. Whoever is called of God becomes spiritually a part of the Israel of God and an heir to the promises. Now, last time we reached a point where to Rebekah, she was told that her descendants would possess the gate of their enemies. I pulled up the map online. We looked different places around the world, some of the land and sea gates that have been in the hands of the British people and America, Many of these are still held and many have been given back, but still a remarkable story. We followed it through to Isaac, to Jacob, and we looked at, well, let me just go on. We ended up in Genesis 35 as far as the story of two sons being born, Jacob and Esau. Esau was born first. Jacob was holding on to his heel. He's the heel catcher. He's the deceiver, the supplanter. And the promise was made, Genesis 35, we saw that there would be a great nation and there would be a company of nations. So the story continues, and we need to go on now to part 2. Again, Jacob, renamed as Israel, was told his descendants would become a nation and a company of nations. Now, a limited fulfillment certainly took place in the days of ancient Israel when the children of Israel left Egypt, and then the 12 tribes, 12 nations gathered together at Mount Sinai. And certainly there was also a limited type during the days of the United Kingdom under David and then Solomon. Solomon's Israel, they had 40 years of prosperity and peace, and in many regards it was a foretype of the kingdom of God. So let's continue on. It will be important now. Last time we looked, first of all, at promises to Abraham, and secondly, to possessing the gates of their enemies. We'll go number 3 now to the birthright blessings, and we need to focus on this concept of birthright, what it is, what it includes, and then we will look at some of the scriptures following where the birthright, the predominant physical blessings went. We should first define birthright, and the booklet we have provided a reference that I just used from the booklet, but this is from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, 1979, Volume 1, the entry on birthright. And it says, the birthright was the right belonging naturally to the firstborn son. Such a person ultimately became the head of the family, the line being continued through him. As firstborn, he inherited a double portion of the paternal estate. The firstborn was responsible for exercising authority over the household as a whole. So Rebekah gave birth. She had twin sons. Esau was born first, and Jacob was born second. And Rebekah was told, and we read it last time, she was told that the younger, so that's Jacob, renamed Israel, Jacob would become stronger than the older, that's Esau. And then it said that the older would end up serving the younger. Now, God had predetermined that this was the way that he wanted it to work out. Before the boys were even born, this is what God planned. However, he didn't explain to Rebekah how he was going to bring that about. And you know how we humans are. Sometimes we like to get ourselves into trouble by trying to help God out. And we always get into trouble when we try to do that. And that's exactly what Rebekah, with her favorite son Jacob, got caught up with. So let's look at Genesis 25, beginning in verse 29, and we will look at the story where the birthright is sold. It is sold. Again, all of this was unnecessary because God had predetermined it was the birthright was going to go to Jacob, who was the younger. And God's the one who says, I will have mercy upon whom I have mercy. So in verse 29, chapter 25, verse 29, now Jacob cooked a stew And Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with the same red stew, for I am weary. Therefore, his name was called Edom, connecting with the color red, a red stew. But Jacob said, sell me your birthright as of this day. Verse 32, and Esau said, look, I am about to die. So what is this birthright to me? Verse 33, then Jacob said, swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose, and went his way. Notice, thus Esau despised his birthright. He saw it as something of little value, and he sold it for something to put in his stomach. So he sold his birthright to Jacob for bread and a stew of lentils. Now, we read last time the story of Rebekah and Jacob deceiving Isaac. Remember how Esau was out hunting. Isaac and Rebekah, they made that horrible mistake as parents of having a favorite child. And Jacob preferred Esau because he was a hunter and he liked the venison he would bring in. And so the dressing up with the furs on his arms, because Esau was very hairy and Jacob was not so much, and then cooking up some from the flock. And anyhow, then that led to Isaac passing the primary birthright blessing on to Jacob. And as he did, he blessed Jacob with the dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine, and also rulership over other peoples. Now in Genesis, we're going to skip over a lot of chapters because there are quite a few chapters. Joseph's story is very important, but we can skip over the part where he's sold into slavery, and then he ends up in prison, and then is brought to prominence. And then ultimately his brothers come down, and he is in a position of being God's agent to give relief to the family in a time of drought. Let's go to Genesis chapter 48. Because the time is drawing near for Jacob to die. Jacob, who is renamed Israel, is dying. And Joseph, by this time, has married an Egyptian. He has a couple of sons. Their names are Manasseh, firstborn, and Ephraim, the secondborn. And so Joseph brings his sons to his father, requesting that he pass a blessing on to them. So in Genesis 48, in verse 1, he hears his father is sick. And of course, his life is about to end. And so he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Well, verse 3, Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz, that's the ancient name for Bethel, where he had the dream, and he saw the ladder and the angels ascending to heaven and back in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. And he said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make you of you a multitude of people, and give this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. And your two sons, verse 5, your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Interesting that already the order is changed. Verse 1 says Manasseh and Ephraim, going by the birth order, and now Jacob speaks and he says Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Jacob says, these boys are now mine. As Reuben and Simeon they shall be mine. So what does it mean as Reuben and Simeon? Well, I think back earlier as Jacob had gone off to Mesopotamia to his mother's people and the relative Laban, who happened to have a daughter named Rachel that Jacob wanted to marry. And he had to work long and hard for Laban. Jacob, who was a deceiver himself, went and lived under the real master deceiver, and that was Uncle Laban. So he married Leah, and then he married Rachel. But the scripture tells us that he loved Rachel. He loved Rachel. So now he is married to two women. And let's notice, again, because of this favoritism, which seems like it was woven into that family line at that time, because of that, then God closed the womb of Rachel. She couldn't bear children for a long time. But Leah popped out a lot of kids. Pardon my popped out phrase, but verse 31, Genesis 29, verse 31. 29, verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son and called his name Reuben, and the marginal note says that it means see a son. Her sister couldn't give birth, but she gave her husband a son, named him Reuben. For she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction, and now therefore my husband will love me. Well, I'm not sure it's quite that easy. Verse 33, then she conceived again and bore a son and said, behold, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. And Simeon means heard. God had heard her, and so another son was given to her. And it goes on, she conceived again, bore a son, and this time son is named Levi. And then one more, another son. And it says, verse 35, she conceived again and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. And Judah means praise. Then she stopped bearing. Now later on she had two more. But there were two through her handmaid, and there were two through Rachel's handmaid, and then finally Rachel had two. So 12 sons and a daughter is mentioned. But Reuben and Simeon were the first two sons, Reuben being the firstborn. So he would normally have received the birthright blessings. He normally would have received a double portion of the father's estate. However, in chapter 48, we read that Jacob was taking Ephraim and Manasseh. They will be mine. And Reuben and Simeon are no longer in the equation. Now, why would this happen? Now, we're going to be bouncing back and forth here in Genesis 48 and 49, so you may want to keep a place there. But we can go and find the answer in 1 Chronicles 5, verses 1 and 2. 1 Chronicles 5, verses 1 and 2. And this is, this will give us the answer. 1 Chronicles 5, verse 1. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was indeed the firstborn. But, okay, here's the explanation. But because he defiled his father's bed. The Old Testament law was very clear as far as the son does not discover, he does not take to bed someone who was his father's, a woman who was his father's. He defiled his father's bed. His birthright was given to the sons of Joseph. And notice the birthright goes to the two of them. It does not go predominantly, or it does not go wholly, completely to one of them, but to two of them together. Manasseh and Ephraim, or Ephraim and Manasseh, as Jacob referred to them. The son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright. So Reuben, Simeon, they're not accounted for here. But verse 2, yet Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's. So, just as a reference back, you have Genesis 35. There is the story told of Reuben having intimate relations with Bilhah, who was the handmaid of Rachel. And that was the act of defiling his father's bed. And of course, Bilhah is the one who had borne two of his half-brothers, Dan and Naphtali. But it defiled his father's bed and disqualified him from receiving the birthright blessings. And so essentially we find that from Jacob, it actually skips over that next generation of the 12 sons. It did not go to Reuben. He disqualified himself. And the firstborn through Rachel was actually Joseph. It didn't go to Joseph. It skips over that generation of the 12 and goes to the sons of Joseph. Now, let's go back to Genesis 48 and notice in verse 16, as Jacob is speaking, verse 16, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, Ephraim and Manasseh, let my name be named upon them. And so here another aspect is that the very name Israel predominantly is going to be named upon these sons of Joseph. Now the others were of the children of Israel, but the name is attached to Ephraim and Manasseh. And the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. So Manasseh, Ephraim, Manasseh, they are the ones to receive the predominant birthright blessings. Now, if we look at verse 19, in verse 19, remember how Joseph then presented them for a blessing, and that then Jacob was crossing his arms. He did it wittingly. I think the old King James says he did it on purpose. He knew precisely what he was doing. And his right hand, which would generally represent the predominant blessing, it was crossed over and went on the head of Ephraim, the younger. The left hand on Manasseh. And so in verse 19, but his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He, that's the older Manasseh, shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother, that's Ephraim, shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So the firstborn becomes the singular great nation. The younger one of the two becomes this multitude of nations. And together they receive the name Israel, and they receive the blessings of wealth and power and national prominence among the nations. And they also will inherit the jealousy and the hatred of a lot of people as well. So chapters 48 and 49 of Genesis are very important. We see that the promise of the birthright blessing is separated from the promise of a ruler. We'll see that in the next chapter. Chapter 49 is a chapter where Jacob is about to die, and he calls in all the boys, brings in all the sons, and he has a blessing to pass along to each one. He mentions Reuben in verse 3, then Simeon and Levi in verse 5. And you can go all the way through and you'll find all of the names. But let's focus on verses 8 through 11, where he speaks to Judah. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Again, in the Hebrew, Judah means praise. Your hands shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down like a lion. Now, isn't it interesting? If you go to visit Great Britain, you find these lion statues all over creation. And it's just stamped upon the British Empire. The color red also, and anciently red was the color of the tribe of Judah. And what color did the redcoats wear? Well, I gave it away. In the Revolutionary War, they wore red. What color do the Royal Canadian Mounted Police wear? Well, they wear red. It's stamped all over them. So he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? Notice verse 10, the scepter. All right, the scepter wielded by the king. It denotes kingship, rulership. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. So again, the lion has long been a symbol of the tribe of Judah. And here we have also a description. Judah receives a promise of rulership. And that also has a spiritual dimension. Now, genealogies can be followed. You have a ruling house, the House of Windsor over in Great Britain today. And their genealogies are very clear. There was a marriage, there was a merging of the line of Judah and the line of Joseph long, long ago. And they are descendants of the house of Judah. And they are reigning. They have rulership. The scepter is in their hand. Again, a lot of those things I just don't feel that we should take the time to focus on, but there's plenty of information that is out there. But kingship over the tribes was given to Judah at the time when David became king. And there was a gathering of all 12 tribes under David. First of all, it was Judah and Benjamin, but then all tribes. And of course, it said the last chapter that Judah, your brothers, would bow before you. And so with even the divided monarchy, the northern 10 tribes broke off separately. They lost their name. They lost God's law. We just recently in a sermon heard about Jeroboam and changing the feast to the 8th month, and indication possibly changing the date of the Sabbath at that time, and setting up alternate sites at Bethel and Dan with a golden calf to keep the people from going back down to Jerusalem. But you also had the house of Judah, and the line of David remained there. For good or for bad, there were some really great kings like Hezekiah, and then there were a whole bunch of other kings. But all of this across the ages, and then ultimately Jesus Christ as the son of David, the ultimate fulfillment, will come and reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And in the book of Revelation, there is a reference to him that the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, was the one who was found worthy to open the seals on that scroll that John was troubled about. Let's go, excuse me. Let's go a little further in Genesis 49. Let's go down to verse 22 and read what is said of Joseph. Joseph is a fruitful bough. A fruitful bough by a well. Well, anything that has a more than adequate amount of water, generally we think is going to flourish, especially in a dry, arid country. His archers run over the wall. Excuse me, his branches run over the wall. Verse 23 speaks of the archers. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the son of Israel. I'll go ahead and read the next two verses as well. By the God of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of his head, on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers, because Joseph, remember, was sold to slavery. He was separated, but then God lifted him up above his brothers. So in this chapter, it's looking, as verse 1 says, Genesis 49, verse 1, he calls the sons, gather, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. So we're looking at a prophecy here of the last days. And what did we read? Well, Joseph's descendants will expand beyond their natural boundaries. And last time we read a scripture where Jacob was told, of course, he had been promised this land of Canaan, but he was told that your descendants would spread to the east and the west and the north and the south. They would overflow their natural boundaries. They would have political, military, economic prominence over other nations. They will be shot at, as he spoke of above. And as a power, to this very day, we have those who attack us, come after us. We do not have it within our natural national character to perceive a threat and go and take care of it before it becomes a threat. It seems like we have to have a Pearl Harbor. We have to have something like that to, what was it that, I think the one Japanese admiral said something about we have awakened a sleeping giant. We have to have something to wake us up. And then most of the time, victory, but the victory comes from the hand of God. There are too many coincidences where things just happen to go. The weather on D-Day, that made possible the invasion. But they will possess productive lands. They will control phenomenal natural resources. They will reap bounteous crops. They will have vast herds of cattle. I think we can say these things, valuable timber, valuable minerals. And I don't think we're forcing an interpretation in by saying that. But we live in the last days. So somewhere on this earth, we can find peoples who enjoy the birthright blessings. We looked last time in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said, heaven and earth will not pass, one jot, one tittle won't fail to be fulfilled till all things are fulfilled. The promises that began to be given first to Abram about 3,700 years ago, they still remain. And there are few nations across the millennia who could claim to have inherited those blessings. It's a question of, is the Bible true? If the Bible is true, as we know it is, then there have to be a physical people somewhere on the earth with these blessings. And only two candidates can be realistically looked to, and that is the British Commonwealth or Company of Nations and the United States of America. But we have a challenge as far as going forward. Israel ends up settled in the land. They are brought to Sinai. They are then, they spent 40 years wandering based on their own lack of faith. And then they were settled in the land. And they began growing and flourishing and having all kinds of internal problems through the ages of the judges. And they had a king all along, and the king's name was God. But you remember the story in 1 Kings where they finally went to Samuel, God's prophet and judge, and they in so many words said, "We want to be like the world around us. Give us a king that we can look to." And Samuel tried to warn them, but they weren't going to have anything. They wouldn't have anything. They wanted a king. And so God gave them a king, and that led to Saul. And of course, that didn't work out very well. And then God gave them David. And with David, then there was, because of the relationship that he had, there was this everlasting kingship that was established through the line of David and to his descendants after him. And again, the information is available. You can follow that line through genealogies, and Queen Elizabeth II, who of course died in the last couple of years, and now King Charles. They are of that line, and they are of the line of David. And yet the ultimate King of Kings is coming. We then go through the time to just kind of summarize part of what we've studied before. But as time went on, after David, of course, there was Solomon. And Solomon is the most amazing story, the most amazing study. He had everything. He grew up as the kid. He had more than a silver spoon in his mouth. He had a golden spoon in his mouth. Everything was given to him. He was given the kingdom, tremendous prosperity, and it sounds like a marvelous reign, but then he began to change. He had been warned, don't multiply horses, don't multiply wives. And 1 Kings 11 tells us his wives changed his heart, and he began worshiping other gods until the time came when God said, all right, your kingdom is ending. But out of my commitment to your father David, there will be a remnant. So after Solomon, of course, the kingdom was divided. Instead of 12 tribes, you had 10 tribes to the north who followed Jeroboam. And you had initially Judah and Benjamin, who remained faithful to the line of David through Solomon, through Rehoboam. And later on, after some of the things Jeroboam did, the bulk of the Levites came and joined with them as well. So you have the house of Israel, the house of Judah. And I think next time we'll look at a prophecy, a fascinating prophecy in Leviticus 26, because they were warned. They were first of all told, if you obey my voice, here are all these blessings that will fall upon you. And that is exactly what happened. Tremendous blessings. But then it shifts about verse 14, 15, it shifts. If you do not obey, here's what's going to follow. And that God would begin punishing them. And there would be this 7 times. So we'll look at 7 times and define what it is, multiply the answer by the 7 times, and then apply the day for a year and see the most amazing thing. Israel went into captivity 721 BC, and 2,520 years later, you come to the year 1800. All kinds of things began breaking free, breaking open. Tremendous discoveries, tremendous expansion of the British Empire, and seeds sown that would then generate where the United States, a bit with the Spanish-American War, but then with the First World War, and then certainly with the Second World War, came to the fore as the world's only superpower. So, but then the sad part of that story is we also have to realize there is time of destruction, of national downfall, of national captivity. So we will focus on that next time.